Thank you, Caroline, for that very generous introduction, and also for the invitation from the law school to come and speak today. I'd also like to acknowledge the Bidjigal people and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also echo the welcome to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students that are joining us this year. Now, one of the problems with an effusive introduction is that it immediately sets up a dynamic where you all think that I have something interesting to say. I've unhelpfully contributed to this state of affairs by putting on my grown-up clothes and having a moustache. So I would therefore like to begin today by making it very clear that I'm going to talk to you about something that you might not find very interesting at all, and that's you. Somewhat counterintuitively, this will involve me talking about me for a little bit, but mostly I'm just going to talk about you. The reason why I'm going to do this is the same reason why I'd first like to take a moment to sincerely congratulate each and every one of you on being here. This is one of the best law schools, not only in Australia, but in the world. As I know that the Dean likes to tell pretty much everyone he meets, we currently sit 12th on the global list of law schools. It's exceedingly difficult to gain a place here, and as you will discover next week when you start classes, this means that you're going to be surrounded by the brightest and most vibrant young people in the country. While it may not feel like it right now, as the newest members of this community, you've already set yourself apart as people marked to make an impact in this world. When I was sitting in your place 8 years ago, struggling to see the stage through my long, shoulder-length greasy hair, I was surrounded by, even though I didn't know it at that moment, by 3 future Rhodes Scholars and 5 students who would go on to work as associates to High Court judges. And I was also surrounded by some of the most inspiring, thoughtful, and passionate people I've had the privilege of meeting. Without overstating it at all, you are, individually and collectively, the people who are going to define not just the legal community, but Australian society as a whole. The reason why UNSW Law alumni have been so consistently successful is because every person that comes through this place has an incredibly formative experience. I therefore want to look today at a few facets of the experience that you're all going to have in the next 5 years, starting with the fact that you're here studying law. I will out myself as someone who picked this degree just because I got in. I had no real understanding of what studying law meant, and I will admit that in the absence of a particularly strong pull towards any one degree, I opted for a safe choice that would present me with a few things. The first was this idea of good job prospects. In some of my more unhinged moments, I think that it was actually the collective smugness of law students in 2008 about their future job security that was single-handedly responsible for upsetting the karmic balance and causing the global financial crisis. Regardless of whether this is actually the case, the unvarnished truth is that you're studying a course at a time when the legal job market is quite flat and there's an oversupply of law graduates. While it's prudent to be conscious of this fact, I also think it's important to view this in perspective and not let it dominate your decision-making and your experience of university. I was someone who initially fell into the fairly common trap of making decisions on the basis of trying to keep my options open. And this was nominally for the purpose of trying to get a job. My preoccupation with this idea that I needed to make myself somehow marketable meant that I stuck with my commerce degree for 2 long and dreary years before I finally changed to arts. Now, clearly there is nothing wrong with commerce, but the point is that this is a unique and special time in your life where you are afforded the freedom to focus on developing your mind, and it's simply a waste of your time and effort to spend your time studying things that you don't like. And what's more, in my experience, the first thing that employers care about is not necessarily what subjects you've done, but how well you've done in them. So this situation is regardless of your degree or what subjects you're doing. One of the difficulties that I know is common for law students, and is something that is connected to this idea of keeping your options open, is how to cope with the expectations that you place on yourself. By definition, all of you are high achievers. In order to have made it to this point, you must possess extraordinary ability, drive, and self-belief. you're all used to being the best or one of the best students in your class, and you probably have been that way for your whole life. It's therefore really important for you to realise that as you are now entering a unique environment, peopled exclusively with others like you, it's unavoidable that the majority of you will no longer be at the very top. Now, contrary to what you would expect, this is actually a great thing for a number of reasons. The first is that it provides you with an opportunity to decouple from the need for external validation and to challenge the fusion of your identity with your achievements. As you may be aware, rates of depression and anxiety are disproportionately high amongst lawyers and law students. Mental illness affects 1 in 3 law students at any given time. That's a third of the people in this room. One of the key drivers for these issues is stress and anxiety about not performing to a high standard in a competitive environment. Research has shown that unlike comparable groups, such as our colleagues in medicine and engineering, law students have higher expectations for themselves in terms of external markers of success. So, for example, getting a certain grade or joining a particular firm. The key then, not only to avoiding negative patterns that can negatively affect your mental health, is to establish positive behaviour and to try and approach your study and your work as something that is inherently fulfilling. By not approaching study as an activity instrumental to a result or a job, you'll allow yourself to learn more freely and you'll take away many of the risk factors that cause the problems that face many law students. Now, the second reason why not being the best can actually be great is because adversity breeds growth and development. I had a relatively tough start to university, not least because I moved here from the great state of Tasmania. Aside from the many cultural differences, such as the mainlander insistence on inventing words such as mufti day in lieu of more sensible titles such as plain clothes day, I found that coming from a small town at the age of 17 to live by yourself and study full-time was quite challenging. One of my less desirable habits during this period was taking to having a quick beer with a few game classmates in the break between the first and second hours of my introducing law and justice class. Now, while I wouldn't recommend this to anyone, I'm reasonably sure that my very tolerant lecturer, Dominic Fitzsimmons, actually enjoyed the debate a little more after we had these breaks. However, by the end of the semester, I was getting some of the worst marks in the cohort. I found myself in a position where I'd gone from, a mere 6 months earlier, receiving the equal highest HSC mark in Australia to being one of the poorest performing students in my degree. This was a confronting process. Up until that point, I had understood myself through the prism of my academic and school success. Dramatically shorn of this identity, I was forced to look at what lay underneath and to try and reconceptualise my reasons for doing things, whether that be at university or in other areas of my life. When I look back at my time at university now, it was this period, which took some time to resolve, that was a turning point. Not only in terms of my engagement with the law, but in terms of my willingness to challenge myself and to stretch my identity beyond what it had traditionally been. Now, while I'm sure that most of you will not make nearly as many mistakes as I have, I think the point remains that you should treat the inevitable adversity that you will face over the coming 5 years as an opportunity for personal development, rather than as a sign of some terminal flaw in your character. Of course, it's not only through struggle that we learn about ourselves. I want to spend a few minutes talking about what it means to be at university more generally, and some of the benefits of putting yourself out there. This is a singularly exciting and character-defining period in your life. Most of you have just finished school. The majority of you are now voting adults, and you're all starting to explore and understand the world in your own terms. This is the perfect time for you to question who you are, what you want to be, and to test your boundaries. When I came from interstate, I was put in a position that most of you are likely not in. I was forced to create a social group and a life from scratch. While I miss my family and my school friends, this situation meant that I had to be proactive in joining societies, being the annoying guy talking to people in class, and playing sport, and generally getting involved in my college. Over time, I developed some fantastic friendships and cultivated a rich and diverse life. I would therefore like to encourage each of you to not only be proactive about embracing this fertile environment, because not only because of the interesting experiences that this will expose you to, but primarily because of the people that you will meet. As I mentioned earlier, UNSW's greatest feature is the calibre of its people, both its staff and its students. As you'll be able to tell just by looking around this room today, your cohort will be defined by diversity. Diversity of ethnicity, religion, gender, education levels, and politics. To provide an example from my own cohort, one of my best friends came to Australia from India when he was 16 and promptly set about turning himself into a hipster before hipsters even existed. Another close friend introduced himself to me and the class by explaining that the reason why he couldn't sit still is because he was recovering from a near fatal car accident while working on a mission in East Timor prior to starting law. Another friend of mine was a middle-aged Lebanese optometrist from Lakemba. My mooting partner was the son of Cypriot aristocrats. Personally, my father's a Singaporean Indian, son of a refugee, and my mother is exclusively bred of convict stock from Tasmania. So these diverse backgrounds lead to fascinating class discussions, interesting social groups, and unconventional career choices. One friend of mine who recently graduated has set up a wildlife criminal law firm in Namibia. Another one is currently working on Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. In short, the people around you ensure that this will be an exciting period of exposure to new ideas. And so I encourage you, in the strongest possible terms, to invest time in meeting people and forming bonds that will likely last a lifetime. I'd like to pick up on the theme of career choices. And I briefly want to mention the importance of taking advantage of some of the extracurricular opportunities that Caroline mentioned. The most accessible of these are internships. I'll say that being able to go and work in different legal environments, which Caroline mentioned, for a few months at a time, was absolutely invaluable in narrowing down exactly what I wanted to do, both academically and professionally. If you're someone who doesn't have a clear idea of what you want to do, or even if you want to practice law, then I suggest that you throw yourself into internships in all the areas that you feel you might have some interest. As Caroline mentioned, I'm a particularly big soccer fan, and so I spent some time interning at Football Federation of all places, and discovered an interest in sporting administration that I wouldn't have predicted had I not done that. Similarly, a friend of mine interned at a radio station, and he's now running a film company. So aside from internships, I'd also encourage you to consider the various opportunities that this law faculty presents in terms of letting you travel overseas. Once I found out that the law faculty very generously funds students to compete in different international legal competitions, I set about trying to master the dark arts of mooting and negotiation. I was lucky enough to travel to Guangzhou in China, The Hague in the Netherlands, UC Berkeley in America, and to South Africa and Swaziland, all on funded trips that I couldn't have otherwise afforded if it wasn't for the law school and for getting involved. My visit to South Africa was particularly impactful, as we happened to arrive for the World Human Rights Mooting Competition the day before Nelson Mandela passed away. We were staying only a few blocks away from his home, and we were able to line up with ordinary South Africans to pay our respects while he was lying in state. Seeing firsthand the global impact that a single human being can make in their life was truly inspiring, and it was one of the main reasons why I applied for the Rhodes Scholarship a few years later. Now, while I can't guarantee that you'll all have this experience if you do one of these competitions, I can safely say that you'll come back changed for the better, regardless of where you go. A related concept to taking advantage of the extracurricular opportunities available to you is harnessing the intellectual capital of this place. I find that many law students fall into the trap of defining themselves too early in terms of their career goals. A common goal for many people is to work at a commercial law firm. Often these students will narrow their law school experience to subjects and opportunities that have some link to this sector. I think this is a mistake for three reasons. The first is that it operates on a false premise. Most employers that I've encountered are searching for people that have diverse skills and experiences and the demonstrated capacity to traverse different fields. When it comes to choosing electives later on in your degree, narrowly focusing on subjects exclusively in, say, commercial law, international law, or human rights will not only prevent you from learning about new things, but it will stop you from enriching your current knowledge by engaging in meaningful comparative study. The second reason why I think this is a mistake is because it will mean that you're not making an informed choice about your ultimate area of practice and work. It's only by trying things out that you can develop an appreciation for them. And I've found that inspiration can really come from the most unexpected places. The third reason is that I don't think you'll be able to fully engage with the vast array of learning and wisdom that collectively resides amongst the law professors here. We have some of the best academics in the world at this university, and I think you would be doing yourself a disservice to not take advantage of them. I would now like to change tack slightly and talk about what it means for you to be studying law today and how this relates to this faculty's historical commitment to social justice and serving others. The world that we live in is one that is undergoing some very dramatic changes. Many of the basic tenets of international society established in the wake of World War II seem to be dissolving. Democratic countries around the world are grappling with extreme political polarisation and utter social fragmentation. We're struggling to effectively address a global existential threat in the form of climate change, the Paris Agreement notwithstanding. In Iraq and Syria, we're seeing the very concept of the nation-state being systematically dismantled. No doubt the surest sign of the impending apocalypse is the rise of Donald Trump as the Republican presidential nominee. And he's riding a wave of racism, sexism, and fear. And while we may feel insulated from some of these movements in Australia, we do nonetheless face significant challenges. We continue to fail our First Peoples. We seem trapped in an ever-contracting cycle of political crisis, where authenticity and conviction have been banished in favour of cynical self-promotion. Our collective capacity to engage in meaningful debates about our Australian identity is at an all-time low. In the context of these challenges, both at home and abroad, it can be tempting to give in to apathy and a sort of listless despair. However, I strongly believe that the only way we can hope to transcend these problems is by nurturing our sense of care for one another. I view law as being suffused with this basic ethos. As you will learn in the next couple of years, the law serves a number of important institutional functions in society. We provide a check on the power of the executive and the legislature. And in the absence of a Bill of Rights, we, as the custodians of the common law, serve as the main protector of people's liberties. The law, however, is not an infallible tool. The recent High Court decision, as that demonstrated, the continued inhumanity of our refugee policy is something that cannot be changed by our courts and can only be changed by the public will. So it is on this basic understanding of the law as a means to protect and nurture that this law school was built. Conceived in the heady days of the 1960s and 70s, we have retained a commitment to social justice that is, I think, appropriately captured by the quote from Hal Wooten, which Caroline read to you earlier. Now, there are two reasons why I think each of you has a responsibility to uphold this tradition. The first is that, by virtue of your enrolment here, you are now a privileged person in society. Regardless of your background, and regardless of whether you want to practice as a lawyer, you will now be equipped with the tools with which to help others. To neglect what I believe is our shared responsibility to act at least partially in the interests of others is not only to reject an important ideal, but more pragmatically, it'll make you unhappy. As people motivated by achievement and self-betterment, we are all necessarily focused a lot of the time on ourselves. Even the act of studying law is really an indulgence in the pleasure of attending an educational institution to expand your mind and for you to grow as a person. And I think one of the dangers of this process of self-improvement is that we can mistake the journey for the destination. The point of succeeding in life, materially or otherwise, is not simply your own edification. Sooner or later, you will find that to improve yourself in a way that does not ultimately enable the flourishing of others is to seek a life that will never be truly rewarding. So while it is great to strive, I urge you all to keep in mind Hal's words over the next 5 years and beyond. Before I finish, I would like to leave you with a few short thoughts aimed at some of the anxieties that law students tend to have. The first is that yes, it is very likely that someone will kiss you on law camp. The second is to try and remember that, improbable as it seems, you will actually get where you want to in life. Your understanding of what that end goal is at this point is probably unclear, but there's this funny thing that happens, which is that by the end of law school, regardless of what has occurred in between, everyone seems to be quite content about the things they've done and the position they're in at that point. As I've said, the fact that you're here means that you're already on the path to success. So please don't stress too much. Try to live that fun and balanced life that Caroline mentioned, and most of all, enjoy your time here. Thank you very much and good luck.